Hello and welcome to the Modern Romantic Podcast, where we celebrate and inspire romanticism through passionate people doing incredible things. Hi, I'm calling about the weird music I'm hearing coming from the graveyard. Uh-huh, uh-huh. Oh, that's Mozart decomposing? Got it. Thank you. Hi, I'm Trey. And I'm joined by my co-host, Emily. Hi, Emily.
Hi. I'm not decomposing. I have already decomposed. I am now reanimated and I am now undead.
Ooh,
Yeah.
okay. So this is the reprise of Emily.
The what? I'm sorry.
The reprise
The
of
reprieve.
Emily.
Yes, correct. I'm back.
Yes.
You're welcome.
Well, Emily, with these puns that I intentionally started ahead of schedule, would you do us the honor of introducing our guest tonight?
Absolutely. I am super excited to talk to D. Riley Nicholson, who is an exceptionally talented composer and musician. Thank you, Riley, tonight for joining us.
It's such a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. One of the things that I saw that I was really curious about from your bio is that you not only have a master's in music, you also have a bachelor's, but it's not in music. How did you go from psychology to composition?
Well, you're mostly correct. So yes, I
Oh,
have a psychology undergrad degree, and then I also got a bachelor's in music performance. So I did two, um, which I actually combined and studied social performance, music performance anxiety um, under the Dr. Beck. She ran the trauma and anxiety lab at the University of Memphis. And anyway, kind of neither here nor there, but I became this close. In a different world, I'd be a therapist. And then I decided to actually neither go into psychology nor performance and go to grad school for composition because I found that um, I'd rather write the music than play the music. Although I do play the music sometimes, but
so what were some of your findings when it came to things like performance anxiety, or some of the most interesting things that you found?
yeah, well, so specifically that study was in the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. At the time, it's been a long time, so who knows if things have changed. I've been out of that world for a long time.
Hmm.
At the time, music performance anxiety was listed underneath as sort of like under the umbrella of social anxiety,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
there were a growing SAD, standing for social anxiety disorder. They probably should think of a better acronym, but
Can't forget it.
but yeah, but then intuitively you think, really, is music performance anxiety and social anxiety the same thing? That just even intuitively that seems kind of problematic. And there were some, um, and there were some researchers specializing in music performance anxiety that had been questioning this for some time. Like, are these actually, you know, do they actually deserve to be together?
Hmm.
And so you in with peer review research, you never actually, rarely, just overnight disprove something with one study. But it takes lots of things that all build up to change. So I had no grand ambitions of that, but that was the interest, and specifically what we found was that there are specific aspects of social anxiety that do really correlate really well with music performance
Hmm.
anxiety, and others not so much. So that was specifically the fear of negative evaluation and something else that I don't remember because it was a long time ago. um, but 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 yeah, so that was sort of what the study was sort of comparing, measuring both things in a large group of musicians, and um, you know running the numbers. And that's kind of why I found, eventually decided not to go down either research, and definitely not research. I wasn't really a by the numbers kind of guy.
Hmm.
I like interacting with people and being a little bit more on the ground, but it was certainly a great experience. And I think personally, and perhaps somewhat obliquely, artistically, I'm really glad I did psychology and it's kind of informed who I am and how I think about the world.
Sure. That's fascinating. I didn't realize that like a sub diagnosis could be a music related social anxiety. Yeah, that's fascinating. So when
Well, if you have
go
lots
ahead.
of time on your hands, you can read the diagnostic manual.
Oh.
So much fun.
Yeah, it's a good time.
I am curious because you mentioned before that you are either in transition or have become the, um, and I want to get this title correct, the executive director. Um, have you ever used any of those psychological techniques to help conversations as you're managing other people? Not trying to call you out. I'm just trying to say, has that has that assisted in your career at all?
Yes, I'm shrinking and manipulating everyone. No.
You
Yes and no.
too.
No, I mean, hey, it's like undergrad psych degree is really just a intro into a little bit of everything in that world. So let's preface it with that. Um, I would say, no, I'm not psychoanalyzing everybody, but the role of an executive director in a nonprofit is um, such a people role. I
Mhm.
mean, I kind of like to think of it sometimes as the heart almost instead of the head.
Mhm.
And all the main arteries are running through you. So the board goes through you're the board's contact, your staff's contact. You're, in the case of an arts organization, and a music organization, the music director, a musician. So the community, donors, you are the sort of connector, and you're having to code switch and talk to all of these very different uh, constituencies and stakeholders. And so managing people and being able to relate with people is a huge part of the job. So absolutely, having people skills, you really couldn't do this job without it. Not that
Right.
I'm perfect, but yeah, I think uh, you know the psych degree does help me understand people a little bit better. Um, so yes, in sort of in a small way, but not in like an analytical way.
Okay. I was more going for the joke, but thank you. I appreciate the clarity. I appreciate the clarity.
But you also compose, and
Yes.
that is obviously something you're clearly very talented at. I'm wondering what are some of your favorite types of pieces to compose?
Sure. I've done it's hard to choose a favorite, because every medium, every instrument, every ensemble has different strengths to it.
Mhm.
Um, if I had to give you a distinct answer, strings and piano, I know that's terribly original, but it's hard to go wrong with strings and piano. That instrumentation, either piano on its own or strings or both. Um, yeah, probably my favorite to write for. But again, that being said, every ensemble has every instrument has its strengths and its drawbacks. I've also done a lot with electronic music, not necessarily the music, but more using it as a tool of abstraction and sort of, I guess you'd call it electroacoustic music. I've done quite a bit of that, and its drawback is that there's nothing like everything being live. There's no match for that. But the real plus there is that it widens your palette so much.
Mhm.
And so I love that freedom. So um, so a couple, I've actually, and then that kind of happened accidentally almost. I didn't go out to be an electronic music composer, but just um, I think I wrote one piece for Switchboard Music Festival that I think that was the first one. Yeah. It was a little piece. It was sort of a walking music um, concert, if you will, but it was location based. So like when you would go to a particular place in town, that music would play. And my spot was, well, I chose Van Ness Muni Station. Um, and so I, um, and so I actually chose, I mean, if you know San Francisco, people will correct me and say there's no BART at Van Ness, but I use sounds of BART for the primarily. BART actually stops at Civic Center, but anyway, neither here
Okay.
nor there. The sounds of the subway, and that was my palette. And of course, I pitched it up, pitched it down, did all kinds of things, but that was the piece. And then after that, once you do one thing, sort of, you never know where that will go. And then I ended up doing other pieces. I was actually just listening back to a piece today for David Herrera Performance Company,
Mm,
dance company in San Francisco.
yeah.
I wrote a piece for, I collaborated with my friend, a vocalist, and just gave her all kinds of crazy instructions to record. And then I used that as a sound library and then electronically put it all together. Um, anyway, so don't know where I was headed with all of that, but yeah, I guess my point was you can find any medium, any instrument, any sort of situation. The limitations are helpful, and in terms of time, in terms of what palette you're given,
Hmm.
um, and that's the fun of it.
The one that I was really impressed by, and I was able to find a recording of the first movement from one. Um, I, from just an analytical perspective, the blurb about it, about one that you had, really intrigued me, and it's 37 stringed instruments, all playing with their own individual lines, um, and it's exploring the concept of being one in a sea of many, but also playing as one kind of unified concept. So it's kind of that dichotomy of having one against all versus all being the concept of one. And even the first movement itself, I could hear it throughout the music itself. And so that very long-winded way of transitioning, the one thing I have to ask about that is, when you're writing for something like those stringed instruments, what was kind of running through your head with that particular piece? How did you account for 37 individual instruments?
Yeah. So in this, I'm trying to think. That was the process was sort of two big pieces of inspiration. The first piece of it was conceptual. So long, long time ago, I was still a student, and really I was still a student then too. That was, I think, my second year of grad school. And sort of one of the first pieces that I claim, still claim today. Some of them are buried, with a hatchet that should never be seen again. But I'll still claim that one. It's all right. But anyway, the even before that, a couple years before that, when I was, I think, studying in college, my aunt is a violinist,
Hmm.
Mhm.
and we were chatting, and somehow it came up, and I said, you know, what, I think there was an audition or something, and I was like, well, are you auditioning for? She lives in Atlanta, or did at the time. I was like, are you auditioning? Would you consider auditioning for the Atlanta Symphony? And she was like, no, I don't want to.
What?
And she said, I have so many colleagues. Hopefully, she doesn't call in and dispute how I'm quoting her, but she's like, I have so many colleagues that, are in symphony orchestras, and they're so focused on blending. They're so focused on this unified, this one sound, that they lose their own voice. They're a cog in this orchestral machine. And if they don't have chamber music and solo opportunities, that sometimes they get really burnt out. And that was sort of, now that's kind of in the industry. People know that, like, well, burnout is common in every industry, but for string players, it's a real thing. And that sort of kind of blew my mind, because I was like, oh, here, I thought, at the time, I thought this is this pinnacle of artistic success as an instrumentalist. You wouldn't want to even consider trying out for it. And like, no. So that just really struck me. And then that idea stayed with me. It's like, I love symphony orchestras. I love large ensembles. Um, I'm literally have led, and I'm leading symphony orchestras as an executive. So I have a lot of love for it, but that really bothers me. And so I wanted to create a piece where that kind of, I'm not saying it has the answers, but it at least kind of puts that question forefront. Like, what if each of the instrumentalists on stage really had their own part and acted as if they were the soloists, but then we also had sections that were, it's not mayhem all the time. There are sections where they're playing together, and sections where they literally each have their own line, and then everything in between. So that was the concept, and I was really came from that conversation. And then also I don't usually work this way, especially now, but I had a melody in mind that was sort of my source material. And so I started there and then sort of spun it out. I mean, it's a little more complicated than that, but essentially those were the two big things, the concept and then the melody that I had been working on, that I'd sketched out just on pen and paper. And that was the genesis.
That is such a cool concept. I do have a follow-up question. And I think I got about, let's see, one of my favorite parts was about 4 minutes into it, and I really found myself stopping. I was doing a little bit of cleanup, and I just remember stopping and going, okay, that part fits, but that part is like in direct contrast with this. And it was like one solo violin, while this other grouping of violins had this incredible, like, seventh and ninth chords going on at the same time, and you had this kind of dissonant violin going on against it. And I was like, that is so cool, and it scratched such a musical itch that I didn't know needed to be scratched. So I just have to say thank you. My follow-up question is, did your aunt get to play in the premiere of this?
Yes, she did, actually. Yeah, it was an incredible moment. She came out and played.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, so I didn't just use her as inspiration and then never tell her about it. Yeah, she actually flew out and played in the orchestra, and so yeah, it was a really meaningful experience at many levels.
Yeah.
Like for me personally, as a composer, that was my thesis piece as a student. So there were lots of pride points. It was also part of Hot Air Music Festival. That's where it premiered. So that was really meaningful because it was also run by friends. It's a new music festival that happens every year at SFCM. So yeah, it was a wonderful experience.
That's
so
awesome.
cool.
Yeah. What a cool memory to share together too.
Yes, and then also another level, I guess a good sort of a predictor or something. I was also my first fundraising project. So I fundraised to pay for the orchestra. So it did include students, but I wanted it to be a paid gig so that they would really have the time and space, and that I could also pull in some professional ensembles to lead it. So I also got my fundraising chops off, which helped as well. That's a big part of, I mean, even if you're not a professional fundraiser, that is part of being an artist today, is understanding how your works are going to, get played and paid for. And so, yeah, that was a big project. And I was a little bit crazy for a grad student thinking that he was going to, raise so much money, but I guess I had the audacity to.
What an undertaking to do all that on top of it being the project it was.
Yeah, well, I had a lot of friends and help and advisors, and yeah, so it's a village.
Yeah. Well, and fundraising isn't easy even by itself. I don't feel it is anyway.
Right.
So, we do have a question from the chat, and that is, we need a theme song for when we raid castles. Do you do commissions?
I do commissions. I think I need a little more context.
Valid. That is valid.
What castle are we raiding?
Yeah,
Virtual, real life. Yeah, I need some more details. You know, I want to make sure I'm not like, you know, all the castles. Wow, this sounds ambitious.
So the whole story behind it is back when we had Jasmine Lafleur on our podcast, who is one of the founders of Black Fae Day, we started jokingly saying that we were going to take over a castle and that we were going to make it like this whole big extravaganza, invite so many artists, creatives out to do photo shoots, music videos, fashion, really whatever you can possibly think of. So now we're thinking of like trying to have a theme song for it. I don't think that we've defined which castle we're trying to overtake, and I don't think we want to announce it. We just kind of want to like show up and do it.
It was kind of like we didn't know yet either which castle. Like we were kind of like any castle will probably do, really. But yeah. And it was also back for the Mark and Elva Rhinus episode that we came up with it too, because it didn't really get serious until the Jasmine one. But then, like Kaz was talking about horses and armor, and because everybody had something to contribute. Kaz makes armor for horses. Like every artist and every person that we were talking to at the time, like on the show and, you know, as part of our audience, everybody had something to input as far as talent. And it turned into this amazing idea. And we thought, oh, we should make this happen. It'll be like a little mini festival weekend and castle takeover.
I have a counter proposal. It sounds like you don't need a theme song. You need like a fanfare by trumpets to like announce that you're about to attack.
Oh, okay. I like this.
Functional here.
I'm open. Yeah.
And trumpets because they're loud and, you know, destructive.
Right.
I do like this idea. Trumpets with bagpipes? Question mark.
Those are also very loud.
Have you written for bagpipes?
I have not.
Oh.
Okay.
This is cool. I've also not heard trumpets with bagpipes before that I know of, so.
No, that's a very tinny sound with a very I'm not sure. I think the closest thing for me would be like an oboe almost, but like more goose-like.
What'd you say, Riley?
Like 60 of them.
60 of them, yes. Well, the more the merrier.
Yes. Have you ever, on the topic of commissions, have you ever gotten a commission that made you just kind of, at first, just kind of cock your head and go, or alternatively, what is the weirdest commission that you have ever received? I shouldn't say weird.
Not weirdest. I haven't done any, I mean, it's contemporary art, so.
Maybe unusual?
But yeah, sort of unusual for me was, I was sort of not weird at all, but unusual for me, a friend of mine is a filmmaker and was working on a documentary for, it's sort of a funny story. So he was working on a documentary about sort of injustices in the justice system, specifically for youth and sort of the overuse of solitary confinement. Some really heavy issues that a nonprofit was paying him to put together a documentary. So he hired me to do the music. And so, again, like very heavy, dark material. So I, started sending him like very heavy, dark music. And he was like, whoa. And we had to kind of course correct because, it was not a horror film. It was a documentary. So he was right. But in hindsight, I get it. But I was like, I was responding to like, this is like overuse of, solitary confinement and mental health issues and substance abuse issues. And like, it was heavy, and so I was sort of responding to that. But then I kind of went a little too dark. But I course corrected, and he was happy. I was happy. It was, it all worked out. But that was both unusual, and I'm not really a film composer, so that was kind of new for me.
Yeah.
And sort of, you know, I learned a lot.
That's really neat. I meant to ask you about film composing, but that you answered my question there. I think I'm personally inspired by film soundtracks and things like that. The things that set the mood, the things that make movies stand out from each other, and television shows, even productions that, like you hear the soundtrack to Jurassic Park and there's no question what enters your mind. This is Jurassic Park, for instance. So,
Right.
And I feel that way about the emotions that are evoked by that art. And I know there's definitely some of that with even composing, like the one, I want to say the one of your work, when you're considering telling a story, you're still telling a story with music. So when you compose, how do I ask the question I'm thinking of? Trey, do you have a question? Because I'm going to think about this, because I haven't.
Well,
It's just not.
I kind of, is your question sort of around the narrative process, like how narrative it is, and
I
like
guess.
how that?
But there's a difference
Because
between. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead. There's a difference between.
Well, there's a difference between when you're composing for someone else, like someone else's project. For instance, this documentary, or your own story, like you want to, like your project one, where you have this idea, you're telling it yourself. That's like a different process to some degree.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's different. Like when I work with dance companies, that's a different process too, because I'm creating work for them.
Right.
Especially with David Herrera, that was even a little unusual. It was more like a film score. A lot of times, what happens, not always, and I think less and less, but historically, I think a lot of composers would be given for dance would be given sort of some parameters, a subject matter, an overall mood or theme. They would deliver it. The choreographer would choreograph to that.
Okay.
I think a lot of the great ballets, though, were more collaborative. Like Stravinsky was incredibly collaborative with the choreographers he worked with. But anyway, my point is, a lot of times it was very like you are choreographing to the music. In the case with my recent collaboration with David, he actually had choreographed a lot of the work, and I was looking at footage of the rehearsals.
Okay.
And so I was kind of like I was film scoring to the dance. Now I was have a little bit of flexibility, if I was like, it wasn't beat by beat, like I had to hit that jump or whatever. But generally, I could see the arc of it. I knew that about 5 minutes in, this is a moment. So I sort of, there was a framework there that I needed to work within. And then if I needed to go back to him and say, hey, I really need like 5 more seconds here to develop this musical idea, then he would shift things a little bit. But it was more him giving me a structure. And I'm not going to say a story because it wasn't like traditionally narrative. It was a little more abstract than that, but it was a structure and a concept and content. Yeah, but that's very different than when you're just totally on your own. You maybe all you have is an instrumentation and a time parameter, and then the rest is kind of up to you. Yeah, it's a little bit of a different process. I can't necessarily say it's harder or easier. Sometimes the constraints actually really help you, and then sometimes they're really annoying. So it's like, oh, I really need more time to do this one thing or whatever. But so that it's annoying sometimes, but often constraints actually make you better, make you more creative.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question at all, but
I think so. Pushing pushing yourself within parameters, it can be a challenge. I get that.
Yeah.
Like with the recycled designs I've done, where I had to make a dress out of a paper that didn't do well, or I worked with one medium where it did not, no glue would stick to to this. So there were things that I had to find a way to work around. So I get it with my background. Trey, I'm sorry. I felt like you were about to ask something, so I wanted to.
You're
Otherwise,
good.
I've got all kinds of other questions. I thought of them.
I think it's a nice transition for this particular question. Kind of along that same line of like fabric and sewing and those sorts of things. With other artistic mediums, the ability to like go back and edit things may not always be so easy. And this is from a very biased perspective, so I apologize. Please correct me. Whenever you're going through music, how do you decide kind of what stays, what goes, and how quickly does that process, like your editing process or your, no, I don't like that, let me go back to this. What does that look like, and what does that timeline sort of look like?
Honestly, it depends on how much time I have for the deadline. That informs all. Honestly,
Hmm.
there's just some realities there. In terms of like how I make decisions, it's very intuitive. I mean, I feel like that is one of the things that's probably hardest to teach,
Hmm.
which is you can teach theory, you can teach all kinds of things, but at the end of the day, it's the composer's job to know in their gut, um, is this good or is this not? And so at every step of the process, I usually joke that it's like no, 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 yes, and and it's I don't know how we get to yes. It's just me trying out new things. Okay, no, I don't like that. What if we try this? No, I don't like that. What if we try this? Maybe it's getting better, and then finally you just literally feel it, in your body, in your gut, whatever you want to call it, um, and it's a yes, it's working, um, and yeah, I mean, I wish there was a more precise way to describe that, but it's a feeling. Does this strike joy?
We get it.
Oh,
We do.
mm-hmm.
Like we
And
interviewed Ming Tsai, who's a chef, and he talked about the perfect bite, which is all of the combinations of flavor and texture and temperature and all of the whole experience is that sweet spot, perfect bite. And the same is with photography. The same is with many art forms. So we get it. Yeah. The sweet spot of creating.
Have you ever had a moment where you've been composing and you are just on fire and you just like, yes? Like, have you ever like exclaimed to yourself just, yes? And if so, where
yes,
were you? And-
yes, but there was a lot more cursing before we got there.
Why?
Yeah. So yeah, that does happen, but usually it's also a lot of other explanations. And then some days you have, there are definitely the moments where I feel like, okay, like we're getting a lot done today. This feels really right. Like everything's clicking. Love those days, and you have to cherish them because uh, they balance out the other days where you just feel like you're beating your head against the wall.
How do you fuel that then? Like, how do you inspire yourself to stay creative and to keep that level of creativity where it needs to be to continue?
Yeah, that's a good question, and honestly, something I'm kind of grappling with now. I think I was not to get terribly personal, but
Do it. Yeah.
I think so long I was fueled by adrenaline and anxiety. Like, oh, I have this deadline coming up. Oh, what if I'm not good enough? And so that drive was very
Mhm.
effective,
Yeah.
and things would get done.
Mm.
And now I'm trying to find can't say we're there yet. I'm trying to find a better, you know, you can do that in your 20s, and then that doesn't last forever. You start burning yourself out, you start treating yourself really poorly,
Yeah.
and that does not work. And so now I'm trying to find, I don't have the answers yet, but trying to find a better balance of how do we fuel ourselves. Like, we still need the fire, we still have to get things done, but
Mhm.
fuel it in a healthier way. Certainly means more sleep. It means going to other people's shows and um, giving yourself the space. I think, when when I have a deadline or where you're really anxious, of course you go to the piano or you go to the workstation because you have to get it done. Without that anxiety, you still need to create the space
Yeah.
for yourself. Okay, these 2 hours, I'm going to work on X, Y, Z. So working on it.
I think that's a work in progress for any artist in any field at any stage too, because like you said, it doesn't work in your 20s, but even like maybe in your 40s, then it changes and it doesn't work how it worked in your 30s, or and so
Right.
on.
Mhm.
So, then maybe it's not more sleep, it's getting out to various other things more or whatever. I think everybody's constantly evolving and changing and figuring that out what works for them and at that point. So, relatable as
Absolutely.
well. Yeah.
Yeah.
But but also having the courage to at least vocalize that, I
Yeah.
think, is an incredible amount of courage, and it shows how much you care about your work to want to keep making it better instead of just doing the same thing over and over again. So I think that speaks to your creative process, and so I commend you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think taking the steps to avoid burnout and being introspective and trying to figure that out for yourself shows a maturity, and I think that's awesome. And I'm actually really proud of you for doing that, because a lot of people just let themselves burn out, or that gets ahead of them and they can't catch up, and crashing and burning isn't pleasant. So,
Yeah.
go you.
Thank you. Well, we're trying.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, Trey, what do you do?
Cry, hide in a corner.
We do that too.
Yeah, some
Lots of
days.
cursing, lots of cursing. In my head, internally scream. Um, it really depends on the day. Um, for me, I'm going to be very honest that if I am in front of other people in those types of moments where I am so frustrated, it's this unconscious filter that just kind of comes up, but my tone gets a little bit more pointed. I'm a little like bristly, and then if you get me in a closed room talking to other people, my initial reaction is just I need to get it all out, and then I beat my next thought is okay, what do we do to make the situation better? How do we move forward? Because I can't let myself continue to surf the thoughts of negativity. At some point, the surfing has to end, and we have to come back to land and face what's there. So for me, it's that initial rush of emotion. We get back, we focus on what the path forward is so that we can get to a much better conclusion.
So
Does
that's
that provide
Sounds
solid.
like,
clarity?
Yeah.
not to shrink you, but
Do
it
it.
sounds like you're an external processor. Like, are you an extrovert? Like, you like to talk things through out loud?
I am an introvert,
Okay.
just through and through.
But do
But
you,
or
Um,
do you like to like talk things out even with yourself, like journal it out, or even talk to yourself? I talk to myself sometimes.
oh God, I don't stop talking to myself. It is just utterly annoying.
it is. I'm just kidding.
It helps.
It does. It's difficult, honestly, to write things down for me. If I'm forced to do it, I can, but more than anything, it's the flow of ideas that really helps me to process.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I find journaling feels cumbersome to me. So I do the talking thing too. I can relate to that. What about you? Do you journal then, or what do you do, Riley?
A little bit of everything. I journal. I joke. I only journal when I'm either like for an artistic project, and the notes will make like no sense at all to anyone other than me, and even then, sometimes they don't make sense. But like if someone read it, it'd be like, what is going on? There'd be scribbles, and yeah. Anyway, and then personally, yeah, I also journal if I'm upset or need to work through something. So if you read the journals, you'd be like, this is a very upset person, because that's all. You don't necessarily get the happy days or the whatever days. But yeah, that helps me. Yeah, both personally and creatively, I do like to sketch. So it's usually at the front end. When I'm first coming up with a concept, I want to like write out. I kind of want to like visualize the whole structure, the whole meaning of something, and like what I'm trying to get at, and I do find that helps me. And often the end product ends up being something different, but just that process helps me.
Sure, to get it out.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And Emily, what do you do?
Well, like I said, I'm a talker. I usually have to talk through problems. I do talk to myself a lot. Talk to Josh a lot. He gets an earful. That's great. For him, I'm sure. Yeah, he just said can confirm. Yeah, I work things out verbally for sure. And because when I have journaled, this is what happens. And I'm embarrassed to say this a little bit, but it's true. And I think it may be for someone it's relatable. I've kept a journal. In fact, I still have the journal from when I was like 11. And I journaled quite a bit then, and I was really surprised when I went back and looked. Like, wow, I was kind of prolific at this. But it's the most, it was 11, okay? But even now, like as an adult, I'll look back at like what I maybe wrote down a few years ago and go, gosh, that is the most immature, ridiculous, like cheesy, that's not me, but maybe I just needed to get it out there. So and that, going back and reading it, kind of has stopped me. Maybe I shouldn't be quite so afraid of.
Give yourself a little more compassion.
Yeah, for myself, right? like I'm gonna look back at this and think it's ridiculous. So why write it down? Which isn't really the point. So I get it.
Yeah, no, the point is not having a filter. So
at least I'm getting the immaturity out there, and not maybe
Great.
At everyone
Great.
else. Well, this has been helpful. Thank you.
That's why we sketch things as an artist. That's why I don't understand how people improvise. I improvise on my own and sketch things out on my own. But that's the whole point. I'm on my own. So like there's a freedom there, personally, artistically, that you can just get out all the bad ideas, and then find that nugget. People who improvise, speaking artistically, people who improvise, I'm just so impressed by that. I mean, yes, they practice as well a lot. That's a skill, but it is a totally different skill, because people make that connection, think, oh, you should just jam out. And I'm like, no, that is not my skill. We're going to go over the same phrase 20 times, 20 slight different variations, and then we're going to choose the right one. And that's not fun to listen to for anybody else, I promise.
But you should just jam out.
Kaz in our chat said this became a therapy session, and yes, it did. But also, music is therapy in its own way. Art is therapy. So, I really enjoy that.
Yeah, it's therapeutic.
When you're not cursing at fabric for why are you jamming my sewing machine? No, haven't had that happen in the last week or so.
Or when Sibelius completely crashed and I lost everything.
Oh no! Oh,
like permanently, that's it?
Just on one piece.
Okay,
Um,
still.
yeah,
Ugh.
yeah. The days before autosave, and
God.
now I use Dorico, which also has its problems, but it's a slightly better.
Yikes, yeah. Kaz said knock on wood right now, Trey. Do not jinx yourself.
That is
that
me knocking on wood.
that's a good question. Do you have any superstitions or anything like that when it comes to composing or performing or anything like that?
No, I'm not really a superstitious person. I'd say rituals are helpful. Like, have your things that work for you, but I don't like think they have any magical properties.
Right.
Like I like to drink coconut water, or if I'm performing, coconut water, banana, potassium, electrolytes, helps with like muscle relaxation, and um, I usually try to meditate just a little bit. Try to calm myself down before a performance. Yeah, just kind of be self care kind of things. But no, I'm not really superstitious um, about anything really. I'm pretty practical.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
same
I'm
here.
not terribly. In some senses, I'm not terribly romantic. I'm pretty practical. um, I like things to come from feeling, but be balanced with structure and pragmatism, and
Sure.
yeah.
That's valid for sure. I don't think I have any superstitions either. Other than the right sides together thing, and I don't know if I need to tell that story. Do you know the story of right sides together, Trey?
No, but if it's related to sewing, yes, I have sewn the wrong sides together
Yeah.
quite a bit.
Mm.
So there's this thing in sewing where when you're sewing a seam, like if this is the right side of the fabric and you're going to sew these two pieces of fabric together, you would sew them like this, right sides together. You sew your seam down the edge. So when you fold it back open, they're sewn together. And the right sides are facing the correct side. So everything turns out so the right side is on the exterior, the, the printed side, so to speak. And so the saying goes right sides together. It's in the instructions for patterns, it's in all the sewing books, and everywhere, right sides together. There's a few times when you don't do that, but it's more common to do it. And so when I would sew really late into the night in my 20s, and I would be really tired at 3 a.m. trying to continue sewing without making mistakes, I had made up the rights. You constantly kind of mantra right sides together so you don't continue to mess up. Because once you start making mistakes, you just have to go to bed. Like you're done. So to keep things from happening, I would constantly go right sides together until it became kind of a curse. Because what would happen is I would have other friends over sometimes and we'd be sewing, and then someone would say it to remind you to kind of keep that, like, hey, don't mess it up because then we have to quit. So it was, hey, everyone, right sides together. And then it turned into this thing where every time someone said it, someone would mess up like immediately after. And we're like, we need to stop doing this. So we learned to not say it. Which became the opposite of, yeah. And I don't know if that's really accurate or not, but it became a joke. And so, yeah, that's
Maybe
what it
that's
is.
just a sign of anxiety. When you, like you said, by saying it too much, you're sort of psyching yourself out.
Yeah, in the end, we're all overtired and should have gone to bed an hour ago. And
Yeah, or that.
yeah,
Yeah,
right.
that's probably it.
Yeah.
Let's yeah.
But it was still fun to refer to it as the right sides together curse. And that was the other thing is if you said right sides together at any point throughout the day, if you said it out loud, that was it. You can't sew the rest of the day because you'll just mess things up. And so I'm sorry, Trey, if you had any plans on sewing later today. They are ruined.
Well, there is that thing as like con crunch where you have to like continue sewing just endlessly. Uh, so I was gonna sew until 4 a.m., but dang, snap those plans.
I mean, I don't really believe in it, but it was kind of a fun concept. We played with it.
For me, it's oddly like saying the Scottish play. Like I've gotten in the habit of saying the Scottish play. now that I will not refer to it.
Really? You won't just say the
Seriously,
name.
no, I won't say the name. I'll just
Okay.
call it the Scottish play
The
because
play
it's
that
been in.
may not be named, must
Is
not
it
be
like
named.
your Macbeth or something?
Oh, yes.
Ah, yes, he did it.
Uh,
I'm so happy
uh,
you just said it.
but I mean, it's one of those things of there have been people that I've met that have had legitimate stories about the Scottish play being said backstage, and then something immediately follows that. So it's a little bit superstition and a little bit like everybody at like 7 years old will go into their mirror and say things like Bloody Mary into the mirror until they get to the very last iteration of that phrase and then not actually go through with it. And you always find yourself questioning, if I do this, is this actually going to happen? So it's one of those sorts of things of, if I actually say it, what is going to be on the other side of me saying that?
Let's find out.
No.
Macbeth.
We're not in the theater. I think it's fine.
Yeah.
Speak for yourself. I'm always on the stage.
Is there a saying like they say when you're going to go on stage, like for acting or for theater, it's break a leg, right? Is there
For ballet,
anything?
it's merde.
I'm sorry.
Merde for ballet,
Okay.
which is, I don't know if we're allowed to curse on this.
Yeah, it's French for
podcast.
poop.
Yeah,
Oh yeah.
but the stronger version of poop.
Yes. You can say it. It doesn't matter.
But yeah, I kind of use that one just for fun. So I actually used to work with, because I don't like break a leg for whatever reason. I feel like it's kind of cheesy, overused, also kind of violent.
Yeah, it is. And
Um,
painful.
so I don't like that one. So I use Merd almost instinctively, and then people who don't come from a dance background or don't know me kind of like, what?
Or if they
I don't
just
come from
know
a dance
French.
background, but or that, yeah, which also would still get the same reaction. What? But yeah, I'm not a dancer, but in administration, I've worked for a couple dance companies and sort of have many friends in that world. So yeah, I've adopted Merd.
I like it. Married. Welcome to the Modern Married Podcast, where we are off our rockers.
Yeah.
Macbeth.
Oh God.
I'm gonna wear it out. It's not gonna have any effect on you anymore at all.
All right. So minor diatribe. You and Seth are on this kick of saying words that I don't like.
Oh.
He is all about the. We'll have that conversation another time.
Okay.
No.
I'm with you,
anyways.
Seth. I got the memo.
Oh, jeez. So Riley, speaking like about compositions and things, I have always been curious. Like you have been writing now. When we went back, I think one of your earliest works was from 2009, at least that was available on your website, and you now have pieces that are coming out in 2024. That is, you are approaching almost 2 decades worth of writing content.
I didn't even realize that.
Look at
So-
you go.
There is so much that you have accomplished. Do you ever want to go back to previous works and like edit things, or are you of the stance of once it's done, it's just done?
I don't know. Yes and no. I sort of have an interesting relationship with that. I mean, really, it boils down to time.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, yeah. I mean, there are probably some pieces back from undergrad that if I had all the time in the world, it might be really like there are nuggets of them that I think were really interesting that I'd love to make less studenty. But, nobody's really commissioning me to do that. There's a lot of competing priorities. So usually you just have to, let dead things lie there. But but yeah, there has been an occasion where so I guess the best example of this, I wrote a string quartet for Amaranth Quartet. They
Hmm.
commissioned me. Actually, had a sort of long relationship with them, so I wrote them a string trio. They were down one member, and I wrote them a string trio, and then I turned that into a string quartet, and then I wrote. It wasn't a second movement, but it was sort of a sequel to that. It was the original piece was Bend, and then I wrote a piece called Break for them. So they
Ooh.
commissioned me to write that. Um, I was very happy with it. Well, I wasn't really happy with it. There, after hearing it, and it wasn't their fault. So not. It was more me. I realized there was a whole section in it that I inserted that was really interesting content to me that had no place in the piece. And so I took it out. Like it was a 15-minute piece. And after the premiere, I created a version that was more like an 10, 11-minute piece. And it was sort of a blow to the ego a little bit because he's like, there's all this content. And I was like, this just doesn't fit. And it's not bad content. It was really hard. So it was sort of not terribly idiomatic, but the concept was really interesting, but it just didn't work, and so I took it out. And now I won't let anybody play the old version because it's just a better piece without it.
Sure.
So that was one case where I really did make an edit. Um, there are other pieces again, like I would like if time allowed, I'd like to go back, but time doesn't always allow. And also sometimes it's really hard, especially if for larger pieces, if you have a copyist,
Hmm.
you pay a copyist to create the score in parts. So you might, depending on what your arrangement with and how in depth the edits are, you might have to pay the copyist again.
Mm.
So sometimes these things are difficult to edit. Um, yeah, for time and resources. Um, but yeah, unfortunately, there aren't home runs every time.
Right. Well, self editing is a whole nother like thing, where you're having to self audit and edit, and I feel like that's just be able to step back and look at it through different eyes when you've been the one that's been the closest to it this whole time is really a
And
challenge
that's
sometimes.
usually the problem that you've been too
Yeah,
close to it.
for sure.
Um, that was actually, I mentioned earlier that I was listening to one of my pieces for dance company earlier, and that was actually specifically because I'm trying to decide. Um, I'm, I'm considering releasing it as an album on its own, just the music.
Yeah.
But I'm like, does this work without the dance? And so I think I've done this before, and basically I've released a truncated version, and I took out some stuff that worked really well when there were dancers, but I feel like without the dancers, like it doesn't stand on its own. So there's that too. Sometimes like you have to adapt things for different mediums. So for the case of an album, I think I need to make it a
Right.
little briefer.
Understandable. Yeah. What is your advice to someone who maybe wants to do what you do? Composing, let's say. Like
Mhm.
what is your advice to someone who wants to get into that? Maybe they've dabbled or not. They just really love the idea.
Yeah. Well, from a sort of pedagogical standpoint, compose. Just like keep doing it. And the more experience you get, the better. I mean, you get better with every piece, and you learn something new with every piece. Assuming that you're really pushing yourself and not just like you're really trying to push your own boundaries. Um, and then on the more like pragmatic standpoint, I'd say you have to realize that the music industry there are many paths, and it is really difficult to make a living composing. By really difficult, I mean astronomically difficult. Like you can, if you consider the amount of composers, and this is not to be discouraging. I promise. I have a point at the end of this, but if you consider like the amount of composers that are actually only making a living by composing, the number is incredibly few. Most of them are teaching or have another job or maybe also perform or do some, like there are many paths. And so that's the positive side of this. That, most people as students, I thought this too. If you would have said that my day job, so to speak, would be in arts management, I would be like, what's that? Like, what? you know,
Right.
there's, you can be a sound engineer, you can be a PR, music PR, you could be a publicist, you could be an arts administrator. You can be like, there are so many paths to be in the world when you can do your work as well. Um, um, that it's, that's wonderful. And most students don't really realize that. Um, yeah, and and honestly, you have to really do that unless you come from a lot of privilege. Um, you really have to consider what are the different paths that I can take to support myself, um, to make it work. And I find, and there's also the path of have a completely unrelated career and compose as well. I know some great composers who do that. That doesn't work for me. I really like being in it all the time, even if I'm not composing. That's, because but that's my path. So there are
Right.
many paths, is the point.
Sure.
And I wish that more people in who are teachers would talk about those opportunities to be more involved in an arts organization, to do more things that are related to the business of music and be more fulfilling than just interest. Um, that's my one impassioned plea to any music educators who are out there. Please talk to your students about the opportunities around music. It's not only, from my perspective, a way to make yourself more long-term successful, it's also something to be very supportive of other people and help navigate their careers as well as your own. Earlier in the podcast, we say it takes a village, and I think a village can start with a couple people, and eventually it'll grow to many. Hi, I'm Trey. I'm getting off my soapbox now. Thank you.
No, that's a good soapbox to be on. And you're right. I
Yeah.
mean, I think it's changing a little bit, but for a long time, if you're a cellist, if you went to conservatory, especially if you went to like a conservatory, and not like a liberal arts org, um, they teach you how to play the cello really well, and that's their job.
Mhm.
Um, and then they graduate. I would see this all the time at the Center for New Music, where I used to work. It's a small venue in San Francisco, and there'd be these incredible artists, and I would be, and sometimes really successful too, or at least by some metrics, like they won awards or like the artists that they collaborate, whatever. And then like they don't know how to find their light. They don't know how to send me a high res image. Like they don't have a headshot. Like the conservatories don't always teach the music industry, even in some like really basic, surprising ways,
Yeah.
and that's really important. Um, your artistry is incredibly important too, but there's a whole the whole package is needed.
What is something that, if their particular institution doesn't do something like that, what would you recommend that do? Are there any resources that you recommend or any particular places of interest that you would at least start someone at?
Yeah, I mean, I would say start your own ensemble, like try your own startup, so to speak. Um, that's kind of what I was getting at with, why I mentioned that I self-produced the string orchestra, the one piece, because that was
Mhm.
so informative. Because I learned about how to fundraise, I learned about how to put together marketing materials, like dive into a project. If you're not a composer, if you're a musician, start an ensemble or start a band, like just try your hand at starting something. I think that's the way. I think especially I would see the people who struggle the most often are have like been, again, like I'm being a little stereotypical here, but like they've gone to these schools and they've been placed in ensembles and they've been given these really specific incredible opportunities, but they don't have agency over their own product, and they don't have any practice with self-producing anything. I think you learn so much by kind of going out on your own and starting something. Yeah.
Yeah. One question that's in the chat is, what or who is in your most listened to playlist?
Let's see. I've been listening to what's it? I'm terrible with names and I'm blanking. One thing I listened to recently that I've Jacob Cooper. One of his recent albums that came out, I think 2 years ago. I've been listening to Sun or Sunrise, something about sun. Again, I really have been listening to this, but I never think about the name.
Sure.
That's been. I also listen to when I work out, sort of like electronic music, not like necessarily house, but sort of. I really like Arca and sort of experimental electronic artist like that. Let's see. Philip Glass, Steve Reich are some favorites, sort of some go-tos. And what have I kind of don't put music on in the background too much. I'm kind of one of those people, like, other than when I'm working out, like I'm very like intent listening kind of person, or silence, which is unbearable for some people I know, but
well, your world is full of music anyway, so it makes sense that the offset to that would be silence and not needing something to fill that. For sure.
We had just attended the Cabrillo Festival, so I'll be leading it this upcoming year. And some of my favorites there were Peter Shin. He had a piece called Relapse. Kevin Putz had Concerto for Orchestra. I think that's about to be recorded and released. And then Anna Klein had a new premiere as well, and that was really beautiful as well. So those are some of my favorites live recently.
Awesome.
What's something on your playlist that people would not expect you to have?
That's good. Is it Baby Got Back?
I did. I mean, I don't know if it's terrible. I feel like everybody loves Beyonce, but people wouldn't necessarily expect it from me. But I love Beyonce's Renaissance. Although I would say I kind of burned myself out on it. I listened to it too much, and now I'm giving myself a break. But that was on heavy rotation for a while.
Okay.
Yeah. Awesome.
Any plans to go see the Queen Bee?
You know, it seems like an ordeal. I think I don't have enough stamina to like wait in line for 5 hours, and I don't know. It seems like a whole thing.
I don't blame you.
Another one that I listen to a ton, Tim Hecker. He's one of my all-time favorites. He's sort of experimental ambient electronic music, so it's not like electronic music typically doesn't have a beat. It's more abstract, more atmospheric. He's one of my. I listened to that last night. His newest album is anyway, he has a new album out. That's wonderful.
Just go look up the new album, everyone.
Yeah.
Two questions that I have necessarily. My first is that I'm sure as a composer that you've received a lot of feedback regarding your work, whether it be whatever medium you're composing for or another piece that you've worked on. How do you decide between feedback you're going to listen to and when you're going to politely tell someone to go take a long walk off a short cliff?
I rarely do the latter. This is my mother says, you can always take advice, but you don't have to heed it. You can listen to it. Like, I'm always happy to hear, unless it's just vitriolic. I mean, but but I'm always happy to hear people's thoughts, and then I'll decide whether or not to take it to heart or not. Um, I'm trying to think. I do try to, again, unless it just is like from someone who I don't really respect, or if it's clearly vitriolic and they're just trying to be mean, which is rare. Um, I try to, I wouldn't say take it to heart, but I try to think about it, and I'll think about it
Mhm.
over and sort of evaluate it. Does this make sense or not? And then come to a conclusion. So I try to consider everything. I don't want to be above reproach, because then you just get stuck in a rut.
Mhm.
I know I could be better, or maybe it's not even a better or worse, but that maybe it could lead to a new idea. So I'm very much a sort of, I process things. I don't make immediate judgments really on anything. I'm
Mhm.
like, okay, let me think about that and sleep on it,
Sure.
and then give it some consideration, and then make a call, and try not to take things too personally.
That's a good
I think that's
open-minded. Sorry.
no, you were saying exactly what I was about to. That's very open-minded and very realistic. It keeps a very square head on your shoulders. So,
Yeah.
great
Although
advice.
honestly, I wish people. I mean, I feel like that's a real. We have a directness problem, in our art form and our society. Not to get too philosophical, but like we're really afraid to say what we think. Now, I'm not
Mhm.
saying be an a-hole, like do things with kindness, but like I would love to actually know sort of what people think, more than they actually tell me,
Mm-hmm.
just in
Hmm.
life. Like I feel like we're all so guarded. Like do things in a kind way, but like I'd like to know where I stand. Like I feel like we could learn so much more. Yeah, music criticism is like that too. Um, you rarely see, like, I mean, there aren't enough music critics out there, so that's a big issue. But often it's not always, and not with everybody, but often it's just fluffy. And I'm like, I'd really actually like to know what you thought. I don't want a play by play. I don't want effusive. It was great. Like let me know what you actually thought. Um,
Mhm.
Again, don't be mean for the sake of being mean. Like it should
Right.
be well thought out, and kind. But yeah, I feel like that's kind of a real problem, right? And we kind of shoot ourselves in the foot by not being direct, and clear.
And I think that's compounded by being difficult being in art. For
Yeah.
instance, like it's like I've entered photography contests before, and unless you know what the judges are looking for or what they like to see, you don't know who your audience is that's judging. So
Mhm.
Right.
what could be a winning image to one judge is not to another. And so I could see where, coming from like a that standpoint, it's difficult to say because maybe it's just not for me. But then you have, I mean, maybe that's not fair because you also have movie critics who can accurately critique a movie without saying, "Oh, this just wasn't." They can understand this just wasn't for me, but overall as a quality piece, maybe
Yeah.
I didn't explore that enough before I opened my mouth. But
No, that makes sense. I mean, yeah, I mean that's the job of a critic. They should be able to transcend their own
yeah,
taste, and have like an if they actually thought something was wrong with it or right with it.
you're
Like
right.
there's been, and that's a really hard skill. Like I feel like I'm only just kind of now just getting there, where some pieces like I really didn't like that, but it was really well structured and really well
Mm-hmm.
put together,
Mhm.
and like, kind of that's really hard. And I sometimes can do it and sometimes you can't. But yeah, like that's definitely a skill.
To appreciate it for what it is outside of
Right.
opinion.
Even
Yeah.
if like, yeah, I didn't really enjoy it. Like, I'm not going to give an example because I don't don't want to burn any bridges. But
Right. Of course.
like, yeah, like definitely, there's been things I've heard recently. It's like it's so not me. That's so not something I would listen to. It didn't really move me emotionally, but I thought it was really well put together. The audience really liked it. The musicians really liked it. Like it was so well orchestrated. Like you,
Mhm.
yeah, you know, things like that.
The show that comes to mind, that's been kind of on my TikTok feed. Yes, I know it's Vice. Has been Once Upon a One More Time, where the Britney Spears jukebox musical.
Oh,
Um, Audiences have really enjoyed it. It's kind of an interesting take. There are issues that some people have taken with the show, but they're easily kind of like, you know what, it for the sake of the plot, it makes sense. With a little bit more workshopping might be better, but overall, really fun show. They make it an experience, et cetera, et cetera. They're sad to see that it's closing on Broadway now, but the critics kind of lambasted it. The audience love it, but mostly they were lambasted because it was just like, I don't like this, and that's all that appeared in the New York Times. So mostly just to kind of support your point, to say it may not be your point, but as a critic, rise rise to the occasion and deliver to your audience a more well thought out explanation versus just your terrible opinion.
Right. Yeah, and bad reviews, bad reviews are usually that, because like those are the worst, and that's why it's hard to write a bad review well, right?
yeah.
Um, you know, like I have an example. Again, I'm not going to put it out there, but like, yeah, there's the bad review that I read recently. You know, like you have like if you're going to have a negative opinion, like be accurate in what you're saying,
Hmm.
um, and like it needs to make sense, and it needs to be really well thought out. It can't just be like that was terrible. It can't just be like spiteful. You know, like you need to really have well reasoned thought behind it, and make a convincing argument.
That's the key right there. You have to be able to provide why.
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And also like really understand the context, like you were saying, Trey, like the context in which this is happening. Um, you can't complain about something that's not the performers or composers or whatever's fault. You
Hmm.
know, like you have to be really careful about that too. Um, you know,
Yeah, those are all individual choices that contribute to the total art form, and so it's a very clear delineation between, is it the issue with the performer, the issue with the composition work by itself, or a third party that is escaping my mind at the moment, but we'll kind of go with that. Um,
yeah, yeah. That's one thing that, kind of switching gears. That's one thing that not a lot of people realize is, some people, especially with new music, contemporary music in the classical world. People might hear it, and often they blame the composer if they
Mm.
don't like it.
hmm,
And well, often new music is hard, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes it wasn't a good performance. Maybe that was it, or maybe it's a great performer, it's a great composer, but the organization didn't give enough rehearsal time. That happens a lot because often master works are centered at every level of institutions, and then they're like, and we'll do this 5 minute new music piece and we'll rehearse it once or twice, it'll be fine. No, that's but that happens all the time. And then audiences think, I don't like new music, I don't like this composer. Well, they weren't given the proper space to let that blossom. So like all of these things, even, you know, time, resources, good performers, good composer, the marketing, like the way in which it's presented, like so many things go into that experience. And that's really hard for composers, because they often have such little control over that. They have control over what's in the score, and often so little control over everything else.
Sure.
Honestly, that's why like Philip Glass had his own ensemble. Kind of goes back to like the start your own band, start your own project. That's really useful in so many ways. And a lot of composers and musicians have chosen to do just that because they realize, I need the creative control to actually make this what I know it needs to be. And that's one thing that's really hard, is when you're at the mercy of a different producer, and you hope they do your music just as well, and you have no idea, no control.
Yeah.
It's tough.
hmm.
I'm sure it's similar with writers too, with, screenplays and things like that, where it's out of their hands once it's purchased by whatever studio to some degree. At least that's kind of what. Like we interviewed Tom Blomquist, for instance, who did a lot of TV shows that are recognizable in America, and it sounded like as a writer, like he had the most control as an executive producer, for instance. But as a writer, sometimes it was like they're gonna do with it what they're gonna do with it, and you kind of had to let that go. And he talked about some of that as well.
Yeah, that baffles me. The idea that they just kind of like, at least with the score, that you don't deviate from the notes.
Oh, right.
You know, like that's a big no-no. But yeah, I know writers, they just really, I mean, I don't actually know, but my understanding is that unless they're executive producer or director or something, like their script can kind of be shredded to bits. That's wild.
Yeah. Well, and even the actor can say this line doesn't feel like my character, and then it goes back to the writers to rewrite it, or they'll change it right there on the set. So, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I didn't think about that. Changing notes is not okay. Not as okay as changing like lines for a movie.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes that will happen if it's a really nice collaborative experience with the ensemble. Sometimes you can do that in person.
Okay.
And that's fine. Like, but it's very much if the composer blesses it, right?
Right.
It's not like the music director is ever going to be like, no, we're changing this. I mean, there are times, but it's usually inappropriate if they do that.
Yeah, I would think it would be. Yeah.
I have something, and I'll share it with you after the show. There's another musical example from Broadway in a recent performance, and I will save that because I could go on forever about how much the show that I want to talk about is in my heart. My last question here that I want to ask is, where's your creativity taking you now? What projects are you looking forward to debuting in your upcoming schedule?
Yeah. So I just finished a violin quartet for a friend. And so I gave her the first draft. There'll probably be some slight revisions for that. I'm actually in an interesting phase. I'm not actively, I sort of am putting the bow on a couple projects and then I finished an orchestra piece that I'm trying to figure out what life I want it to have, and some edits and things that need to happen. So I'm a little bit at ground zero. For completely new projects, I don't have any. I had an interesting conversation with a friend that might go somewhere. Excuse me, the other day. But yeah, orchestra piece, a violin quartet. Considering that, and then I'm considering releasing an album. Nobody hold it to me. Of some previous works that are re-releases. And yeah, I mean, I just moved to Santa Cruz, California, as I mentioned, for the Cabrillo Festival. So I'm kind of in a transition, both, I guess, literally, location-wise, and my move cross country, as well as artistically. I'm kind of in a transition period, figuring out, okay, what's next. So definitely have some things on the burners, but also to be seen.
Sure. Santa Cruz is awesome. I love Santa Cruz.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. If you ever look up Chaminade Resort, CHAM, I can't think of the rest. Chaminade. Anyway, yeah, I've stayed there several times, and it is glorious. And the views are awesome. And there's a
Chaminade?
Chaminade. Yeah, I think you can just probably go there for their food, which is also amazing. CHAMINADE. Chaminade. Anyway, yeah. It's like,
and apparently I'm writing a 60 trumpet fanfare for your castle raid. So.
Oh, yes, right. That's coming up, too. I'm glad you didn't forget, like we did.
Never. I'll be expecting a commissioning agreement in my inbox.
We'll get right with you.
We'll have our people call your people.
Right.
Great.
Sandra will be in touch.
Perfect.
Sorry, Sandra. That's awesome. Well, I'm sure you will enjoy Santa Cruz. It is. Yeah, it's a lovely town. Yeah.
Well, Riley, I am so happy that you joined us here today. This was incredible. I'm so glad you took an opportunity to speak with us and share your insight and your experience with being a composer, and being a part-time therapist in your current role as executive director. It has really been a pleasure to have you on the show.
Likewise, it's such a pleasure speaking with y'all. I really appreciate it, and considering all the other guests you've had on here, it's an honor.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been wonderful to have you on.
Thank you.
Before we go, we want to make sure that our audience is able to connect with you. Where are some places that our audience might be able to either see notifications of your upcoming work or be able to interact with you more personally?
Yeah. So RileyNicholson.com is my website. It's relatively up to date, and has links to Spotify, Apple Music, where I have several albums and EPs and singles out. And I think my socials are on there as well. So, yeah, I would love for people to check out my music and website, and I will lead you to all kinds of places.
I do have a biased opinion. Please go listen to the first movement of One at least. That is incredible. Please go listen to it.
Yes.
So definitely recommend that.
Thank you.
But as we close this episode out, this episode, along with probably every other episode forever and always, will be in memory of Joe Capone, our moderator, fellow comedian, passionate encourager, and greatly missed friend. Follow us pretty much wherever you tune into podcasts. For updates, announcements, and more, please follow us on social media under Modern Romantic. Thanks, everybody, and have a sonata-filled day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Thank you.